everyone. So last stream there was an intention to talk about Caitlyn Jenner's bid for California governor, and despite the fact that we tried our best, we didn't get to it. So I decided this was going to be one of those rare occasions where I do a side video, because I think this is really important. So the place I want to start from is the idea that I think it's important for us to understand why a lot of trans people are critical of Caitlyn Jenner. And it's pretty simple to see when you start to understand what her history is like and what her behavior has been, and why, despite her best efforts, she still is not really doing anything all that particular effective. You can probably hear the pupper barking. So let's get into this. So this is Caitlyn Jenner's Wikipedia. It says here, Jenner is a Christian, leans towards political conservative, and is a Republican. She describes herself as socially liberal and fiscally conservative, so basically a libertarian. I've gotten more flack for being a conservative Republican than I ever did for being trans. Well, that makes sense because you're being a token. Although stopping short of an endorsement, Jenner said she liked Ted Cruz. That should be a fucking red flag to people. Despite his negative views of trans people. Way to throw us under the bus, Caitlyn. But furthermore, she liked the idea of voting for Donald Trump even though she didn't support him because she thought he would be good for women's issues, and then stated very clearly she would never vote for Hillary Clinton. Apparently, she said she voted for Trump in 2016, but never cast an actual ballot. Right? What does it say here? In February 2017, President Trump rescinded federal requirements giving transgender students the right to choose the school restroom matching their gender identity. In response, Jenner tweeted, "Well, at Donald Trump from one Republican to another, this is a disaster. You've made a promise to protect the LGBTQ community. Call me." Let's be very clear. You knew what you were getting. This man is a bigot. You knew this, Caitlyn. And the reason I want cis people to understand this is that one of the things that's said in a lot of leftist communities and a lot of liberal communities is the idea that the personal is political. That is, the reason why people who are trans or a person of color or indigenous person or however you want to go about this, the reason why we're so passionate about politics often is because they directly impact us. Caitlyn Jenner is a really good example of how class, that is, money and fame, can act as an insulator to the negative effects of being transgender, namely harassment, assault, disownment from family, all sorts of stuff. The reason why Caitlyn is accepted is because Caitlyn is famous, and that the Republicans like using her as something of a token. This is no different than, say, Candace Owens or Blair White or any of these folks. They will be relatively kind to them unless they're full mask-off Nazi. The problem I have here is that she says here she's a trans advocate, and she has done some things, like, for example, coming out, which does create some level of representation, some level of media exposure, visibility, yada, yada. And there have been a lot of people who have spoken very positively of her. However, do remember that in July 2016, she went to the Republican National Convention and asked essentially for them to accept transgender people. She went to this in support of this. The problem is that even if she says tentatively that she is an ally of trans people, fellow trans people, mind you, the reality of the situation is that she is, by all rights, a threat to other trans people. I know that sounds like I'm being hyperbolic. Don't misunderstand me. My belief is that her views on trans people are not in any way compatible with Republican or libertarian views. They just aren't. Without there being governmental protections to make sure that we are safe and sound and secure, the reality of the situation is that she can say she's all for us or not, but she's also separated from the rest of us. In a lot of ways, she is very much sort of carved herself out a niche, and that niche is fine, good for her. But the fact is that this needs to be talked about. I know this has already gone around Twitter, and I know that a lot of people have already discussed this. I find myself very personally bothered by this, not because Caitlyn is just a conservative, but she's a conservative with very real leanings towards wanting to become a politician. If she runs for governor, it stands to reason that she could possibly win because there are liberals who will think from mid-poll perspective that she's a good person to vote for, regardless of what her actual policies are. Additionally, the bigger concern is that this is how we got Trump. This is how we got Reagan. These two men simultaneously tore this country apart. They were devastating. I mean, think about it from this perspective. 500,000 people died underneath Trump because of his mishandling of the coronavirus. Millions died under Reagan with mishandling of AIDS. We cannot handle another celebrity Republican president. And as such, I want to nip this in the bud. I need people, especially like liberals in California, but really anybody, to understand that what you're really looking at here is somebody whose ideology does not really match with their identity. I'm not saying that every trans person has to be a dyed-in-the-wool leftist, but the fact is that personal rights, the liberty to be who you identify as, these are core tenets of the Enlightenment to which conservatives reject fundamentally. And the idea that you can fight for these scraps, these tokens of respect, I think are really concerning. So I want to kind of talk about this for a minute. So let's see what Politico says. Let's see here. Caitlyn Jenner running for California governor. Caitlyn Jenner, the former Olympic gold medalist and the decathlon turned TV star and transgender activist, is officially running for governor in California. Her entry puts a Hollywood-sized spotlight on the GOP-led effort to eject Democratic Governor Gavin Newsom from office, complicating his path, firing up social media, and raising questions about just how much of a circus-like atmosphere will dominate the election to determine who will lead the world's fifth largest economy. Holy shit. Let's see. Mention Arnold Schwarzenegger. We're going to get into some rough stuff here, folks. California has been my home for nearly 50 years, Jenner said in a statement. I came here because I knew that anyone, regardless of their background or station in life, could turn their dreams into reality. But for the past decade, we've seen the glimmer of the Golden State reduced to one-party rule that places politics over progress and special interests over people. Sacramento needs an honest leader with a clear vision. What? Oh, okay. I mean, you guys are usually the ones that don't talk about policy, but go off. Let's see. Gonna have a recall election. Jenner 71. Yeah. I mean, basically what this comes down to is she is working closely with Donald Trump's former presidential campaign manager and the person behind his small dollar fundraising success. Like, let's be very clear. If she has Trump's team with her, it stands to reason she has Trump with her. I mean, I don't know that for a fact, but doesn't that make sense, people? Like, seriously. Like, small business has been devastated by the over-restrictive lockdowns. This is not actually true. Small business, based on every bit of research, has shown that this is not an issue of the lockdowns. It's an issue of COVID. No one wants to go out and spend fucking money when they could die. Like, this is not how this works. An entire generation of children have lost a year of education. And honestly, that's not the worst thing in the world when it comes to preventing them from spreading a national pandemic. Yes, kids still socialize and participate with their friends. I'm sorry, Caitlyn, but you're 71. Like, no offense. And granted, I'm getting up there myself, but every kid I know, every client I know that's a teen, like, they use Discord. Like, they still connect with their friends. They're still socializing with their friends online, playing video games. Like, the idea that they're not, like, yeah, in person probably is pretty good, but the reality of the situation is that, like, this is just flatly false, or at least not nuanced enough to be meaningful. As far as preventing going back to school, most of the kids have either been in either distance education or been going back in and out, depending on how the lockdown's been going. And the reason the lockdowns keep getting shut down is because states' Supreme Courts keep shooting them down. This was true in Wisconsin, and this was true in Michigan. Let's see. What else do we have here? Taxes are too high, killing jobs, hurting families. Let's be very clear. If you believe the taxes are too high, you do not understand how taxes work, or you believe in mythical shit like there should be no taxation. Sorry. I like roads. I like libraries. I would like the idea of eventually a public transit system that works across the country. I would like the idea of people being able to build a better tomorrow. And the way you do that is through infrastructure. And infrastructure is paid for through taxes. Sorry. The idea that, now granted, I'm not defending Gavin Newsom. I don't know shit about the man. But let's be very clear. Y'all have lobbyist friends. This is nonsense. One of the things that is really important to look here is that I think if she wins, I think that she's going to be a devastating effect on that state. And if she goes further with it, possibly the country. I feel like there's a very real way in which people are going to play this off as just silly again. And the fact of the matter is that, to me, as a trans woman, this is an existential threat. Because this is the worst kind of tokenism. It's a person who's coming in there with the intentions of trying to make things better for people like myself, but buying into a system of absolute 100% domination and capitalistic intent that further damages people. Like, let's be very clear here. You can try to give us all the rights you want, but if you don't address the actual underlying problems, like, for example, us being able to have rights to be able to, go to school and actually get good, decent jobs and that kind of stuff, you're not really solving anything. The problem is that for someone like her to win, she would need to give a lot of concessions to a lot of people who are very, very unsavory. And there's even a question as to would they be willing to make that compromise with her in order to push further against the left. I mean, let's be very clear. This is what the right does. It finds tokens, people who are part of marginalized communities, and it uses them as a wedge. Because let's understand this. So you'll hear people talk a lot about idpol, the idea of identity politics. The simple thing is that idpol gets complicated because I believe very clearly that we should listen to marginalized people. We should listen to them and try to understand their perspectives. However, there's an asterisk on that sentence, and that is, I still think we should check the reports of people via the data that we can find, or we need to do the studies for that data. The reason I say this is that, well, I want to believe people. The problem is there are examples of people who are part of marginalized groups who lie. Candace Owens, Blair White, all the people I've mentioned previously. These are examples of bad faith actors who use their identity to drive a wedge to necessarily either convert moderates to more of a right-leaning perspective, or at very least try to slow down liberals who don't want to speak over the marginalized person. I think this stuff does demonstrable harm. And so I think it's very important for us to be very wary of this. Now, it says here that Jenner has become a voice for transgender rights, but again, she was supportive of a president, and he's using his campaign manager who absolutely hated transgender people. Like, do we have to go through this every single time? Like, California LGBT leaders on Friday greeted Jenner's entry with heavy skepticism and accusation that she is part of the Trump backfired recall effort. I think that makes sense. I think there's a way in which this gets really problematic. Like, here we go. What is it? Desperate grasp for publicity. Let's see. Equality California, one of the nation's largest advocate groups for LGBTQ and transgender community. The Trump administration spent 4 years attacking trans community, trans students, patriotic trans servicemen, trans patients in hospitals. She said so herself, and yet she's working with these people. She's still part of this party who wants her silenced or dead. I mean, if people really want to understand this, like, here you go. I saved this little thing just because I think it's funny. And by funny, I mean horrifying. Starting at the top, all the way to the bottom. Let's start here. Here's everything Trump did in... This link will be down in the description, by the way. Here's everything Trump did in 2018. Oh, did they add another page finally? Oh, wait, no, that's 2017. Yep. So everything from January 20th all the way up to the end of the thing. This whole page is everything Trump's administration did against trans people, against LGBT people. His record is abhorrent. So I want to make it clear to people that we don't want to take this lying down. I think Caitlyn Jenner is a terrible idea for politics. And I think anybody that's in that state that is an LGBT activist or ally needs to speak out about this. Sadly, I'm not in your state, but I do want to make it clear where I stand on this. I think Caitlyn Jenner doing this is really concerning. And the fact is that it might be just me, people saying I'm like getting alarmist or anything like that. But the fact of the matter is that Trump was abhorrent for LGBT rights. And I cannot, in good conscience, allow this to go unchallenged. So even though we didn't get to on a stream, I have to bring this up. I need you guys to understand this. Links will be down in the description. Caitlyn Jenner's Wikipedia. I'll have the Trump's record and the Political article. I think it's really important we speak out about this. One of the things that I've made very clear on this channel is that my goal is to always work towards solutions, right? And my understanding of this is that this is why I don't come down on the big cancel trains. This is why I don't go this. I want to understand them and I want to come to my own conclusion. Further, when I do these things, I also want to then focus on the real problems. Trump and his ilk are an existential threat to LGBT people. Trump and his ilk are an existential threat to people of color. Caitlyn Jenner is a woman who, well, yes, she is trans, and that I think that's great. I totally support her journey in that regard. Is still someone who was white and very rich and has class to protect her from the horrors of dealing with certain parts of this country. And let's be very clear, the fact that she basically told, what was it, Vanity Fair, that the most difficult thing in her day is picking what to wear. This is not someone that's really connected to the trans experience, not to the same people as we are, not to the same like situations and difficulties. This is someone who's insulated. There was a discussion a while back about the idea of class and the idea of the way that class can kind of act as this interesting intersection. And I think this is true. You can look at this with the 50-cent tax thing. You can look at this with lots of different situations. But the fact is, class does act as a somewhat buffer. And that doesn't mean I'm a class reductionist. I don't think everything can be reduced to class. But I do think it's important to recognize that very, very clearly, this person has nothing in common other than being trans with the rest of us. And I don't want to say that this person should be ostracized or anything, but this is kind of the overall thing. I think we have to be really careful that our allies, our families, the people who support us as being trans don't fall for this. Because while I would love California to have a transgender governor, I really don't want it to be her, because I think she's going to have to make a lot of devil's bargains. And we're going to just see more and more people part of that Trump train. Does that make sense, guys? Okay. So I've gone off on this enough, but I wanted to sound off to make it very clear where this channel stands and how much I'm against this. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. Do remember the comments are curated for nonsense. So if I see transphobic bullshit against Caitlyn, out. Transphobic bullshit against me, out. We're making this very clear. Go ahead and like, comment, subscribe. And if you want to donate, go to streamlabs.com/transgirltherapist/tip, or you can become a patron. You can go to our Patreon. It's patreon.com/transgirltherapist. I'm in the process of creating a new $20 tier for mindfulness. Get together once a month and do some meditation. But we have lots of different tiers, lots of different stuff. So please feel free to check those out down below. And as always, I love you guys, and I'll see you in the next one. All right? Bye.